Individuals who have woken up are aware that since 2012, humanity, as well as the planet itself, has been transitioning from the third density reality matrix to the fourth density reality matrix. And yes, the third, fourth, and fifth densities are all matrices, but they operate according to different rules and conditions. People talk about escaping the matrix, but the only way to do that is to return into the undifferentiated oneness of all that is. Despite the negative definitions, connotations, and interpretations ascribed to the concept of matrix, most of which are heavily influenced by the eponymous film, matrix isn't a negative thing in itself where souls are trapped against their will. By definition, a matrix refers to some sort of an underlying structure or a mold, if you will. It is the stratum within which something else originates, develops, takes form, or is contained. In other words, it's a container in which a consciousness or an identity can exist and operate within specific parameters. There are higher and lower level matrices. Although much more expansive and elevated, the 5D level reality is still a matrix because it still has some sort of an underlying structure and organization, albeit a very different one compared to the third density. And no, we're not transitioning to 5D as some people claim, because fifth density is non-physical. And the only way to be there permanently is to permanently dispense with the physical body. And I don't think that I need to explain to you what that means. The reason why we don't move to the fifth density is because we never left the fifth density. 5D is the home base where the soul has its permanent residence. When we die, we don't go back to that mystical place. We simply withdraw the minuscule amount of the energy that our non-physical self was projecting into the third or fourth density. 5D is what we call the astral dimension. Sometimes we wake up in 5D when we have lucid out-of-body experiences. Some people develop the capability to consciously project into the astral realm at will. When this happens, they don't actually go anywhere. Their body remains in the exact same physical location. The only thing that travels is the consciousness. It shifts its focus away from the physical third density to the non-physical fifth density. And when you become aware of yourself in the astral dimension, you can see that you still have a form that differentiates you from other beings, as well as from the local environment. But that vehicle isn't your physical body, because the third density body can only exist in the 3D matrix. While you're exploring the astral plane, your physical body is still at your house, where you either fell asleep or are in a deep meditative state. It didn't transform from the 3D body into the 5D body. Your consciousness simply shifted focus, which led to a shift in dimensions, where you are observing and interacting with a different reality through a completely different body that is endemic to that plane of existence. And when you return to your physical state, you simply wake up in your 3D body. The specific parameters of every matrix serve as a filter. Seth, channeled by Jane Roberts, called it camouflage. The concept of camouflage implies that when energy is funneled through a matrix, the inherent restrictions built into it will inevitably and necessarily modify the true original nature of that energy. So our perception of ourselves, as well as the true nature of reality, is ultimately distorted by our matrix. This means that the best we can hope for is relative, watered-down truth, because even the best, highest level information will always be distorted by the camouflage. When you run your unique soul energy through the specifically formatted structure of the matrix, it results in shaping and formatting of the avatar that's uniquely adapted to navigate the corresponding environment that the self is choosing to interact with. When the same energy passes through the fourth or fifth density matrix, a different avatar is generated that's in line with the specifications of that particular matrix. It's like a cookie cutter. The shape of the cutter, in this case the specific matrix type, determines if your cookies look like stars or Christmas trees. So that's the thing about densities. The density your primary consciousness operates in determines the body you have. All this talk about breatharianism and autonomy and how starving yourself is going to elevate your consciousness is propagated by people who are lost in the woods and have no clue about densities, energetic frequencies, or consciousness. And they're selling you a load of garbage. Sure, if you starve yourself long enough, you will ascend to 5D by physically dying in 3D. But that's not what these charlatans tell you. They charge you a shitload of money and tell you that they can teach you how to permanently stop eating, drinking, and sleeping and turn you into a breatharian. While it is true that in the fourth density, the body's frequency is much less dense than the 3D body, with different requirements for sustenance, 4D is still a quasi-physical matrix. Your diet, or lack thereof, isn't the thing that's going to change your consciousness and catapult you into the fourth density, making you more psychic and tuned in. But rather, a change in consciousness is what will automatically and inevitably lead to a total change in habits and lifestyle, including your food preferences. What I want to make clear is that being psychic doesn't make one enlightened. Parapsychism is the ability to perceive non-physical phenomena. You can be psychic and yet still interact with negative non-physical beings and energies. And this point of attraction is determined by the quality of your frequency. At the same token, not consuming food doesn't make you enlightened either. Demons don't eat or sleep because they don't have physical bodies, not because they're enlightened or evolved. And this is why imposing fourth density principles on the third density body isn't enough to shift you into the fourth density. Telling third density people that they can stop eating and learn how to absorb energy directly from the sun, a la photosynthesis, is akin to saying that if you just keep leaping off of tall buildings, eventually you will develop the ability to levitate. Spoiler alert, it does not work like that. Treating 3D body as if it's a 5D body is going to destabilize the physical structure, causing it to break down. We see this in many people who adopt a fruitarian or liquidarian lifestyle but cannot sustain it long term as they experience deterioration of the physical body. That's why when people who experience difficulties on the fruitarian or even the regular vegan diet go back to eating meat, they feel better. Their physical structure is stabilized because the heavy density, low vibrational food is more coherent with their 3D consciousness. Remember, the body is a manifestation of consciousness. It's a partial crystallization of the non-physical energy funneled through the physical matrix. And what is optimal for your body depends on your density and level of consciousness. I explained this in one of my other videos using this particular graphic. The green arrow represents the overall gradient scale, and the purple arrow denotes the frequency of food, which in this example is the standard American diet. Let's say that our starting vibrational range is the red arrow marked as frequency 1. This is the 3D range. Here, the frequency of the food spans 2/3 of the red range, and as long as we occupy that end of the spectrum, the food isn't going to affect us negatively. This means that we can eat meat, cheese, potato chips, and bread and not be too bothered by it, which is the case with individuals who are more rooted in the third density. I'm sure you have heard people boast about their grandfather or uncle who drank a quart of whiskey a day, who ate pig lard by the pound and smoked a pack of cigarettes daily, yet somehow he managed to live happy and healthy till 105 years old. That can and does happen when there's coherence between one's vibrational baseline frequency and their behavior. If you're struggling with cravings for heavy or processed foods, or if you miss certain animal products and have to fight these urges in order to stay on the good side, then it's a very strong indication that you're still resonating too strongly with the third density matrix. And that's okay. 3D is a perfectly valid experience that allows for specific paths of consciousness development. Coherence is when there's no misalignment between actions and desires. A higher frequency person doesn't struggle to let go of steak and bacon. To them, it's naturally repulsive. In fact, it's the shift in consciousness that determines our attraction to or repulsion from certain things. The order of things matters. Trying to change consciousness by altering the body first produces very insignificant and temporary effects that have to be maintained through great effort and often even suffering. So one of the biggest indicators that you want to look at is how easy and natural it is for you to embody higher consciousness principles. If you still crave alcohol, if you salivate when someone is eating a juicy steak next to you, Or if you cheat a couple of times per month by having a piece of bacon because it still has some hold over you, then you're still operating in the lower frequencies. Again, not a judgment, but information. Ask yourself why, knowing and having witnessed the unspeakable cruelty that is employed to produce bacon, you can still crave it. Because there's a disconnect somewhere in the empathic pathways. Now, what if we permanently raise our frequency through meditation, through clearing and balancing of our chakras, and become a better and more loving, compassionate person? Naturally, our vibrational range is going to shift, which is going to be reflected in our physical structure as well. Here it is depicted by the blue arrow marked as frequency 2. As you can see, this new vibrational range on its lower end overlaps with the top end of our old frequency, depicted by the red arrow. This means that our old best is now our new worst. You can also see that the frequency of the sad diet now barely skims the lowest end of our new refined vibration. What this means is that putting low frequency crap into a higher frequency body is going to create all kinds of glitches and disruptions, to the point that it may even put us out of commission completely. This is especially a problem for those individuals that are straddling the fourth density, especially if your soul has created its physical vehicle of manifestation from the 4D template, making 4D your starting or 0 point, which means that you really aren't equipped to operate below that vibrational range without experiencing problems. Some of us entered into the third density with the bodies that were actually designed as the 4D blueprint. This was intentional, as a certain number of advanced souls came on a mission to oversee and guide others through the ascension process into the fourth density. Now, I'm not saying this egoically, as in, oh, I'm so evolved and so enlightened that I'm here to save all these other wretched souls. No, this process of higher frequency souls coming into the lower density reality is a form of spiritual gentrification that's similar to what happens when higher income earners move into bad, dilapidated neighborhoods with high crime rate and drug dealers on every corner, where there's poor access to groceries but plenty of liquor stores. The newcomers bring a different energy than what the natives have been accustomed to, demonstrating through example a different way of being. And little by little, new stores, cafes, and yoga studios appear. The streets become cleaner. The drug dealers are run off by the police, making the area safer. Developers start building new schools and nice residential complexes, elevating the overall vibe and the actual conditions in the neighborhood. Elevation and expansion of consciousness doesn't happen magically in a vacuum. If a person has only experienced squalid conditions in their life and has never seen anything different, then they can't break out of that habitual state unless someone shows them a different way. For a person like that to strive for better, someone has to first show them that the better exists. A similar thing happened during the Renaissance between 14th and 17th centuries, when higher frequency beings incarnated on Earth in substantial numbers, catapulting humanity from the Dark Ages into growth and expansion through art, humanism, architecture, and technologies that haven't been seen before. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and it delineated the period when humanity experienced elevation within a relatively short time. So what we are doing now is not new, and is generally how consciousness development occurs. We entered 3D reality through the upper range of its spectrum, with the bodies formatted and designed for where we were going, not for where we first arrived. And we suffered because those bodies were not compatible with the 3D matrix. And if you are still listening and you haven't changed the channel, then I bet my bottom dollar that you're one of those souls. You suffered physically and you suffered emotionally from early childhood. You were born into the world where you didn't belong because you didn't come to be a part of that world. You came to help birth a whole new world. These are the Ehlers-Danlos people with hypermobility who were literally born into bodies that were much less dense in terms of connective tissue composition. We had physical problems that started in our childhood and adolescence. We are the late diagnosed neurodivergents with high-functioning autism, ADHD, or both. Our brains are literally wired differently, with up to 3 times more synapses in certain parts of the brain, which means less filtration and more information being funneled in. Hello, psychic abilities. We can see, hear, and sense what the neurotypical brain discards. But there is a price to pay for this upgrade. We are tortured by loud noises, crowds, and bright lights because our senses are already so heightened. Food sensitivities, digestive issues, histamine intolerance. It was like we weren't compatible with the world we were born into. We were the black sheep who were scapegoated and despised by narcissistic family members because we wouldn't accept unfairness and dishonesty, because we saw the insanity of the tyrannical system that governs the world. So we spoke out against it, and we were severely punished for being the truth tellers. We were bullied, beaten, and abused, our unique gifts squashed. Our entire lives, we have felt like aliens in a bizarre world that didn't make sense. Why am I bringing this up? Within the last couple of months, the shift of the planet itself has been completed. The resulting increase of the 4D frequencies we are now bathing in has also accelerated the individual transition for a large number of people. This means that for those with the 4D blueprint body, a lot of the difficulties we have been experiencing in health, as well as the resistance we have felt from the third density reality, will ease off. There will be more flow and ease in work and finances if you are willing to drop the old 3D principles and conditioning. Now, I want to clarify that shifting to fourth density doesn't automatically mean that you'll be levitating or moving objects with your mind, because a density is a spectrum that encompasses a range of frequencies. This means that 4D reality isn't homogeneous, and where you fall on that spectrum will determine your capabilities and access to information. Frequency denotes the speed with which the energy is vibrating. Most people in 3D are in the range of 40,000 to 60,000 cycles per second, whereas fourth density starts at 200,000 cycles per second. So there's a significant gap between 3D and the lower end of 4D. 290 to about 300,000 cycles per second is the higher end of the 4D range, where the body no longer requires food or sleep. The vibrational threshold that delineates the physical reality from the 5D spirit world is 333,000 cycles per second. As you can see, there's still a great deal of range and variation in terms of how consciousness manifests within a higher level reality. It's similar to how in the third density, you can have enlightened, kind individuals coexisting with absolute degenerates who brutally harm others, or in the same way that abject poverty can share space with affluent opulence. So it's important to be honest with yourself about where you are and who you are. You can't get where you want to be without having a clear idea of your starting point, because the rules of the game will differ based on your baseline. Different people are in different phases of this transition. Some have fully decohered from 3D, while others are still moving through the process. I want to help explain to the best of my ability how this process occurs. The same way you cannot take your 3D body into the fifth density when you astrally project, you also cannot take your 3D body into the fourth density. The version of you that occupies 4D already has an appropriate 4D body. So when we experience the transition from third density into the 4D, the breakdown of the 3D body is the result of decoherence. The body itself isn't actually breaking down. Your connection to the 3D matrix is weakening, which you experience as things coming apart. Because we're in the lower frequency range, we experience this process in slow motion. Think about the difference between watching a soccer player pass the ball and make a goal when it happens in front of your eyes in a matter of a couple of seconds, versus when they slow the tape way down during the replay and you see every minute detail of the pass. We're experiencing this consciousness shift while watching in slow motion how our consciousness disentangles from the 3D stratum. which is perceived as destabilization of the 3D structures. And I'm not just talking about the body, but relationships, jobs, place of living, political circumstances, and so on. This is where people tend to get stuck. They panic because their body no longer looks or functions as it used to. Or maybe they have lost a source of income, and this feels very scary and unsettling, causing them to want to stop the process in order to regain previous stability. To them, it seems that what they had before was better than what they have now. And so they want to rewind what they perceive as damage, because from their perspective, the new 4D matrix hasn't coalesced into a perceivable structure yet. The problem is that trying to stabilize the 3D structure keeps you stuck in 3D, and it doesn't allow you to finish the transition into the higher frequency density. This can actually slow the process of transition even more, extending this negative, unpleasant experience of being stuck in the ruins of what once was your life. Transitioning into fourth density has initiated the decoherence from the 3D matrix, destabilizing the body much like an earthquake destabilizes a building. So you find yourself in a partially destroyed structure that you are desperately trying to patch back up using 3D tools and methods. The result is the body that can no longer go back to its previous original state, but which also fails to achieve the complete 4D restructuring. So you find yourself in a sort of limbo, straddling both densities, which is creating distortions in both the self-image and your observable external reality. Fear, lack of understanding, and trust in the process that's occurring keeps you stuck. Breatharian Victor Truviano described his transition as a kind of death, where he was unconscious for a number of days. He felt quite ill during this time and thought that he was dying. I actually believe that death is exactly what he was going through. The 3D iteration of his persona was left behind in the third density, as he successfully decohered from it. He woke up feeling better, but what followed soon after was that all his teeth fell out. It makes sense that the densest parts take longer to restructure. And as already stated, you cannot take your 3D teeth into the less dense, more refined fourth density, especially if your teeth are defective to begin with. People imagine that their old, damaged teeth will just magically repair themselves, but that's not how it works. You know that if you want new kitchen cabinets, you have to demolish and take out the old ones first. It's the same principle. Now, I don't know if Truviano got to such a point of acceptance that going toothless didn't faze him, or if his level of lucidity was high enough for him to have a deep knowing and understanding about what was happening to him, thus allowing him to move through the process without resistance. Most people, myself included, would freak out and would immediately want to stop this breakdown and try to fix or correct it. They would interpret the loss of teeth as a negative event, concluding that something has gone terribly wrong. But Truviano, who at the time was living in isolation in the jungle, didn't seem to mind. He trusted his inner guidance and the path he was on. Miraculously, he grew a brand new set of teeth within the following 7 months, teeth that were healthier and stronger than the ones he had before. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to follow in Truviano's footsteps. In fact, this entire conversation is about not following ill-informed impulses that may end up harming you. Because after 13 years of no food and water, Truviano announced in 2019 that he returned to consumption. He also made it clear that there is no protocol, technique, or pathway to breatharianism, because it's not something that can be manufactured by following some special process. Who knows? Maybe his 13-year stint without consumption was just an unusually long dry fast. In any case, I appreciate that he was honest when addressing people who want to achieve the state of breatharianism. As a soul, we exist in all densities simultaneously. We don't actually move from lower density to higher density. That is an illusion that stems from how our sensory perception is organized in the 3D body. This means that we don't actually grow from a child into an old person. Both the child and the adult are distinct selves that coexist simultaneously in different timelines within the quantum field right now. I think you would agree that the 5-year-old you is not the same self as the 50-year-old you. The 5-year-old cannot access or comprehend the experience and identity of its 50-year-old version. Similarly, the 50-year-old has lived, learned, and experienced so much life that saying that they are their 5-year-old self wouldn't even make sense. In the same vein, there is no reincarnation because all selves exist now, separated by temporal dimensions. So when we quote unquote move into a higher density, what actually happens is that a shift in consciousness changes our observation field in alignment with a more expanded, higher perspective. If you look at this graphic, the big blue circle represents your whole self, which contains the totality of your being. We're talking about all your parallel lives that are happening throughout the entire vibrational spectrum of existence, from the highest to lowest. That means all the alternate versions of your current incarnation, all the other incarnations, past, present, and future, and all of their alternate versions. This would also include existences on other planets as well as in other dimensions and realities. The green circle in the center represents the current version of you, meaning the self you currently identify as, who is having the incarnation you know as your life. Now imagine for a moment that the red and the green circles aren't there. You could think of the white space inside the blue circle as the totality of the consciousness comprising your whole self. The different size and color rings delineate the different levels of consciousness based on how much of the white space each of them has the capacity to hold. Therefore, each circle corresponds with a different identity channeled through a specific type of body and whose characteristics are defined by the parameters of the area that contains it. The identity delineated by the largest circle contains and is aware of all the information pertaining to everything it holds, including all the smaller circles. The identity defined by the red circle is aware of everything that's inside its boundary, including the green circle. But it does not have the capacity to access the consciousness content beyond its outer red border. The awareness of the self that corresponds with the green circle is limited to its inner contents and doesn't extend outside of that boundary. Of course, this is a gross simplification because the whole divine self, often referred to as the One, doesn't consist of only 3 sub-levels of consciousness. But this simplistic diagram should suffice to illustrate the point. Now, let's focus on the smallest ring in the center, which represents the earthbound physical self. And I'm going to use myself as an example. The amount of the whole self's energy and awareness that comes through the identity known as Ivana is denoted by the white space inside the green circle, which relative to the blue ring is rather minuscule. That tiny area depicts how little of my total divine self is actually coming through my current mind, body, and chakra system. Ivana in the green circle has a specific body that's designed to handle the corresponding level of frequency and the information contained within it. But what would happen if someone opened up the faucet by, say, another 60%, causing a significantly greater amount of higher frequency energy to be funneled through the tiny green circle in the middle? Well, the same thing that would happen to a pipe that's designed to handle a certain level of water pressure. Exceeding that limit would cause the pipe to explode, destroying it in the process. This means that in order to expand one's consciousness, the physical body would have to be reconfigured in such a way that would enable it to comfortably sustain this increased energy flow. This means that the self with a greater level of consciousness, delineated by the red circle, requires a different body and chakra system that would be equipped to handle that higher vibration. Attempting to channel the quanta of consciousness germane to the red circle through the tiny green circle would be like trying to funnel a river through a straw. But it's not just about the volume of energy. It's also about its quality and vibrational frequency. You can think of this in terms of technology and how the hardware, meaning the body, has to be on par with the software or the operating system. Try getting the first generation iPhone to run the latest iOS 26.5 and work on the 5G frequency. It's not possible. Based on this illustration, you could say that the level of one's consciousness can be defined by how much of the total, whole self energy can be contained within the constraints of their identity. Expanding one's consciousness means moving beyond the green circle boundary and thus containing more of who we are outside of the ego persona. In terms of this drawing, this would mean expanding to the level of the red circle. Now, as already stated, it is possible to shift our consciousness beyond the physical realm as it happens during astral projection. This is where we see more proof as to how our base frequency limits our access to higher realms, even when we're not limited by our body. Because if a person is dominated by negative sentiments, attitudes, and emotions, they will only be able to access similarly oriented astral planes, even in an out-of-body state. I recommend that you read Robert Monroe, Bruce Moen, William Bowman, and other conscious projectors who described these experiences. But even if you're able to project into the higher planes while remaining lucid, you will find that having a physical body still limits how much of that information you can bring back. What I have experienced is that I would have a very expanded projection, and while I was in it, I understood everything that was happening, including my communication with the higher level beings. But having returned to the body, my recollection would be jumbled, because the brain cannot interpret data it's not familiar with. It cannot put into physical terms non-physical concepts that it has never experienced. It tries, but what results is a nonsensical distortion, as the brain uses the best approximations that are available to it in its database. It's incredibly frustrating because I would retain the feeling of the experience and the awareness that I knew and understood everything that was happening while I was there, but now that I'm awake in my body, I can't quite translate that experience into cogent concepts understandable to me in this reality. What I'm saying is that your current identity or self not only determines the density you occupy and what kind of body you have, but it also limits the level of consciousness you're able to access and assimilate. What is generally understood as the breatharian level of consciousness requires that we hold more awareness of who we are as the limitless divine being, which requires a physical vehicle that vibrates at a minimum of 290,000 cycles per second. This means that in order for the body delineated by the green circle that vibrates at 90,000 cycles per second to be able to achieve complete freedom from food, we would have to trade the green circle in for the red one. The green circle persona is a completely different identity than the red circle persona, and they have different bodies. When people imagine their transition to breatharianism, they still envision themselves as the green circle but without food or sleep, which is mathematically impossible. Remember that inside the green circle, there's awareness of only one life and identity, which is your current incarnation, whereas the red circle contains not only this lifetime, but also gives your awareness access to a multitude of additional aspects of the whole self. And when I say awareness, I mean direct knowledge, and not the things you read about in books or heard someone else say. It means having the same kind of direct knowledge of your other existences as the knowledge you have about your own childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. The important part of this discussion is understanding that you, as the whole self, are the big blue circle that contains all the other smaller selves. This means that your whole self identity doesn't need to become a prana-eating breatharian, because that version of you is already contained inside the blue circle. The problem is that you will never be able to embody that experience while you're identifying as the green circle, because the very structure of the green circle is designed to prevent you from being able to access that level. While the larger self has access to every level contained within it, by design, the smaller selves are limited by the constraints that keep their experience and perception sequestered inside their respective boundaries. I think I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but freedom from food isn't what elevates your consciousness. Breatharianism isn't the main goal, but rather a side effect of expanding to 4D consciousness that comes with a lower density body, which has different requirements for sustenance. People have this silly nonsensical idea that they can get the 4D body that doesn't need to eat or sleep while continuing to live in 3D. So when I hear another self-appointed breatharian guru promising that he or she has a 21-day initiation course where they will erase your karma, teach you how to eat prana, and make you free from your dependency on food, I want to scream. Understand that everything is energy. So even when you're consuming food, you're indeed consuming energy, but you're consuming a specifically formatted type of energy. The energy required to sustain you depends on the type of vehicle you're operating, and the type of vehicle you operate depends on the vibrational environment you inhabit. For example, if you're sailing the seas, you're equipped with a boat rather than a car or a plane, as the latter two aren't suitable to navigate the ocean waters. But if you need to navigate the roads, a car is a more appropriate choice. It gets even more nuanced because even when it comes to cars, there are variations that have to do with how they are powered. If you're driving an electric car, then you can't put gas in it. But if your car requires gas to run, then strapping a solar panel onto its roof isn't going to make it go. In other words, in order to be able to consume a different type of energy, you must reconfigure the body. It's the same thing when it comes to the idea of breatharianism, which isn't food or body centered at all, but rather is consciousness driven. A higher level of consciousness is going to be supported by a less dense, less material body, but it's the consciousness that's the driving factor. You cannot reverse engineer this evolution of consciousness by abstaining from food. To have the body that doesn't require food, you have to be a different vibrational reality. And I mean that literally, because we do not exist in a reality. We are the reality we perceive. Reality is an internal projection, which is why you cannot escape the matrix, because how can you escape yourself? Understand that you are the matrix. You are a consciousness who's having a dream about being in an artificial reality. Have you had dreams that are incredibly real, vivid, and tangible? Sometimes these dreams are quite unpleasant and scary, making you feel desperate to escape your perceived situation. And then you are relieved when you wake up and realize that it was just a bad dream. Maybe a very realistic bad dream, but a dream nonetheless. And you're happy to return to your real life. Well, this reality that you think is so real is nothing but a dream that only exists in the imagination of the dreamer. Think about it. Does the place you dreamed about exist in some real location that you can go back to and revisit? If you want to leave the matrix, all you need to do is wake up to the fact that you are the one generating it. You give your power away to people who don't know their elbow from their throat chakra, yet who somehow manage to convince you that they can make you stop eating forever and not die. I was once contacted by someone from a fasting group who was looking for a protocol that would enable him to transition into breatharianism. This person said that he had already done Nicholas's protocol twice without results. Of course, I told the man that there is no such protocol, and anyone who tells him otherwise is a charlatan. The problem is that this man paid twice to some breatharian wannabe who predictably failed to deliver results. Yet it still didn't open his eyes to the fact that he got conned. The guy still believes that someone out there is going to give him the keys to the breatharian kingdom. What's interesting is that despite the obvious lack of results, Nicholas and other self-appointed breatharian coaches continue to make public appearances in order to keep selling their retreats and promise things that their track record clearly shows they cannot deliver. Remember Jasmuheen, who was selling a similar pathway to breatharianism? But when people demanded she prove her claim that she doesn't eat, she barely managed to fast for 4 days before being taken to the hospital. As someone who fasts, 4 days without food is a walk in the park. I also want to make a distinction that fasting doesn't make you a breatharian any more than abstaining from meat twice a week doesn't make you vegan. Subsisting on smoothies and juices doesn't make you a breatharian either. I mean, how is it that when you live off of fruits, you're just a lowly fruitarian? But if you blend the fruits and drink them, well, now you have found the loophole that allows you to elevate your status to that of a breatharian. From where I stand, none of this seems to be about the expansion of consciousness, but rather about attention and a superiority complex. That being said, expansion of consciousness is so much more than awareness. It's not enough to gain access to the higher levels of information. You also have to have the lucidity and discernment to understand what you're perceiving, as well as the skill to direct and manipulate this knowledge and energy. But most importantly, the ethical integrity and maturity to not misuse or abuse it. That's why it's not possible to arrive at that level via someone else's manipulation of your energy, the way some of the facilitators claim they can do. This is where these so-called gurus tell on themselves. Svetlana, who allegedly consumed no food throughout her entire pregnancy and then stopped eating altogether thereafter, claims that over a 3-day retreat, she can unlock latent psychic abilities in people with the help of some unnamed man she works with, causing such a rapid expansion of consciousness in her clients that they turn into breatharians. Let me assure you that that is not possible. Unleashing abilities that the physical mind doesn't have the maturity or the capacity to process and integrate would cause a psychotic break and lead to severe harm. Just think of what happens to some people who drop acid and trip so deeply and intensely that the boundaries of their psyche get erased. This blows open the bounds of their identity and causes such a complete disconnect from reality that they cannot find their way back to the home base. When the ego isn't stable, overriding the built-in fail-safes can have a devastating psychological effect, rendering the person incompetent or insane. A really evolved and conscious facilitator would never do such a thing knowing the implications, because that would be like handing a loaded machine gun to a 3-year-old. Then you have the self-proclaimed breatharian Elitom, a serial sex offender who likes to assault women. When he was caught in sexual misconduct, he first blamed it on the woman's breasts. Apparently, they were too large to ignore, and so it's her fault. But then he pivoted to blaming his strong and ever-expanding energy for his misbehavior. I saw his apologists come out in his defense saying that it's because he's evolving so rapidly due to becoming a breatharian that his kundalini is rising too quickly, making all that sexual energy more difficult to control. Therefore, we should give him grace. Are you fucking kidding me? Since when did becoming more evolved and energetically expanded turn people into rapists and perverts? Are people okay? Because clearly they don't understand the first thing about Kundalini. Kundalini energy is the sex chakra energy, also known as the root or the base chakra. It's the densest energy chakra that is connected to our base instincts, like survival and physical resources. We're talking about money, food, safety, sexuality, and procreation. But Kundalini rising refers to the evolution of that energy, which is when it transcends its most dense primitive state, transforming into a higher vibrational iteration, allowing it to integrate with the energy of the higher chakras. When this happens, the sexual urges become less pronounced, not more, and the sexuality becomes less animalistic and more transcendental, more connected to the heart center. Where they show their lack of education is that they seem to understand that the transmutation of the lower Kundalini energy in the root chakra will make you less attached to food. But in their distorted mind, it also paradoxically increases your sexual urges, which is absolute nonsense. What Kundalini rising does is loosen the grip that the material aspects of life have on the individual, like money, power, ego, and lust. It doesn't make you want to uncontrollably grope women or act out in other inappropriate ways. A person who is truly conscious would never trespass against another individual. A truly conscious person is in control of their body, mind, and energy. I don't know if it's because I have ADHD, the side effect of which happens to be superior pattern recognition, or if it's because I was birthed and raised by a literal psychopath. But these people are so painfully transparent to me. I can't believe anyone is buying their bullshit. The good news is that this overall global acceleration and elevation of frequency has lifted the veil, causing the masks to fall off of many of these exploiters. But understand that these garden variety psychopaths aren't even the main event, because they all have negative non-physical attachments. And these entities use them as bait to pull people in order to harvest their followers' energy. Your energy is the currency. And when you blindly follow gurus that are low frequency people, you aren't gaining enlightenment. You are offering yourself for consumption. But luckily, discernment is a skill which can be developed. There's an energy technique called Velo, which I learned more than 2 decades ago. If practiced consistently and correctly, it will increase your psychic sensitivity, it will strip away any negative energies and attachments, as well as strengthen your energetic boundaries and improve both your emotional and physical well-being. Velo stands for Voluntary Energetic Longitudinal Oscillation, which basically references how the technique is applied. It can be compared to a fitness routine, except instead of working out your muscles, you work out your chakras and your energy body. Most people have very poor energetic boundaries and they don't even know it because they're unable to perceive reality beyond their physical senses. Obviously, this is a handicap. I have worked with people who struggle with anxiety, depression, and intrusive thoughts who think that there's something wrong with them. But what would you say if I told you that not every thought, feeling, or emotional state originates within your consciousness? You see, we're constantly receiving information from the field around us, and we are being affected by the energies outside of us, whether we are aware of them or not. We are affected both by physical and non-physical energies. For instance, physical locations carry energetic signatures as a result of certain events that occurred there or specific beings that have occupied those spaces. Think about the kind of energy there would be in a residential building that was built in the space that used to house an insane asylum, where people were lobotomized or tortured with electroshock. Sometimes moving to a place that has very negative energy can derail your whole life, but it may not be the place, it could be a person. Let's say a new neighbor could move in next door with a whole entourage of negative entities in tow, and they start to create a great deal of disturbance in the area. Now you're literally in the midst of spiritual warfare, and being armed with tools and technology to fight it effectively can make all the difference in your life. Velo develops energetic discernment, control, and autonomy so that you can have enough lucidity to know who and what you're interacting with. This requires energetic acuity, literacy, and self-containment. It's not magic, it's work. It is self-training. It's taking responsibility for your own reality and consciously deciding what and whom you allow into your proximity. Having energetic acuity will enable you to discern very quickly what kind of people you're dealing with and whether or not you should trust them. It will also help you sense if the energy in the place you're trying to rent is going to be good for you. When you develop your own abilities, you will have no need for gurus. If this is something that you want to learn, you can email me to book an appointment. However, with Velo, there is a 3-hour minimum requirement because it takes a certain amount of time to relay all the relevant information, in addition to supervising the client's practice of the technique to ensure that it's done properly. You may have noticed that I haven't been doing much in the detox and fasting space in the last couple of years. This is partly due to burnout and partly due to disillusionment. At this point, I am not sure if I will continue doing this work, as I currently find myself at a crossroads trying to figure out where my true purpose is. I'm planning on releasing a couple of protocols for purchase. I may also make some of my hypnosis and channeled meditations that I have used with clients in private practice available for purchase online. This way, you will be able to access some of my work without having to pay for a whole session with me, thus making it a bit more affordable and convenient for you. As always, feel free to share, like, and comment.